allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing.
This is protectionism in the name of fair competition. The real aim is to contain China's new energy sectors, hamper China's high-quality development.
Today I'm announcing new tariffs in key sectors of the economy that are to ensure that our workers are not held back by unfair trade practices. They include the thing I'm announcing today, 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum products, and will counter China's overcapacity in these industries.
But we do not seek to decouple our economy from China's. A full separation of our economies would be disastrous for both countries.
Terms have changed to describe the United States' relationship with China, from President Trump's decoupling to President Biden's de-risking. But it essentially remains the same strategy. And last month in May, President Biden introduced another round of tariffs worth around $18 billion against the Chinese goods, smaller than earlier rounds, but essentially giving the same message. No more free lunch for China. The United States' strategy to cut China to size involves old-fashioned tariffs, security obstacles, and lots of subsidies, particularly in technology, using the arguments of national security, Chinese manufacturing overcapacity, and blaming the cheap yuan, the Chinese currency. What's really driving the US policy? Why has it turned 200 plus years of Western-led free trade thought on its head under a philosophy of rules for thee but not for me? Concern has been expressed why the World Trade Organization, that splitting the world into two geopolitical blocs would result in a 5% loss in real global GDP, and developing countries will be the most hit. As the African proverb says, when elephants dance, it's the grass that suffers. But the US is tired of pursuing its engagement policy with China and getting nowhere, and now it looks bent upon containment and implicitly acknowledging that Cold War II is here. Please subscribe, like and share this video if you enjoy the content on this channel. It will help me to bring a variety of new topics to you to discuss the different issues which affect us all intellectually and emotionally. If I can also request you to watch the content for as long as possible, as that indicates to YouTube that it should suggest it to other viewers. Do share with me your comments and suggestions on other areas that you are interested in and would like me to cover as well. Before we get into what's driving current US policy on China, a small detour back in history helps us to illustrate the United States' contradiction and its predicament today. It was 1842, and the Chinese were forced to sign the Anglo-Chinese Treaty of Nanjing, followed by the 1844 signing of the Treaty of Wangsha with the United States. Western nations loved drinking their tea, their Chinese porcelain, and wearing their soft Chinese silk. The problem was the Chinese didn't have much demand for any of their products, so a lot of silver was being exported to China, depleting their reserves. The now infamous British East India Company came up with an ingenious idea. Why don't we sell the cheap opium extracted from India to pay for the Chinese products? By 1839, illegal opium sales to China paid for the entire British tea trade, and soon American traders also jumped on the bandwagon in selling opium to the Chinese masses. From 1810 to 1838, opium imports to China increased from 4,500 containers to 40,000, and opium addiction spread throughout the country, panicking the Qing emperor, and he banned the opium trade. This started what we in the West now call the Opium Wars, at the end of which the Chinese were given humiliating terms and, among other things, had to allow opium to be sold in the country. This was all done in the name of free trade by Western countries.
If I were in Lin Zexu's position, I would also burn all the opium. But now it's not the opium issue, nor the issue of the lives and properties of a few merchants. It's not even a matter of the dignity of our British flag and royalty. If all nations follow China's example and reject free trade, the British Empire will no longer exist within a year.
If you don't agree, we'll wipe you out.
如果你们抵抗，我们就
消灭你们。
By the mid-19th century, Western imperial powers, including Great Britain, France, and the United States, were rapidly industrializing, producing abundant goods, often very cheaply. They aggressively expanded their influence around the world through their economic and military strength. And free trade was imposed wherever they went, which essentially meant that other countries had to buy their cheap and plentiful goods. In 1820, China was over 30% of the world economy, and by 1870, this figure had dropped to 10%. As China's share of GDP plunged, Western Europe surged. The British Empire became the biggest beneficiary of the collapse of the Chinese Empire, accounting for 50% of global GDP by 1870. Conveniently, as this was happening, there rose a whole school of economic philosophy in the United Kingdom explaining why free trade was the best thing since sliced bread. Adam Smith, in his Wealth of Nations, written in 1776, and David Ricardo, who is now considered to be the father of international trade theory, introduced the concept of comparative advantage, which simply put meant that countries should focus their resources only in those industries where they have the greatest efficiency of production and import the rest. He argued that international trade is always beneficial. David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage is still taught today in Basic Economics 101. So we reached a stage where these countries had the economic might, the military might, and now even a philosophical rationale as to why all countries benefited from free trade. By the mid-20th century, the war-torn nations of Western Europe, who needed economic recovery, got together, and remember, they were still the most important countries at the time. So they set up GATT, which is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It was basically a treaty that was set up to reduce barriers to international trade. Remember, barriers to international trade. By reducing or getting rid of quotas, tariffs, and subsidies, in essence, forcing countries around the world to engage in free trade with them. In 1995, this became the World Trade Organization, which by that time covered around 90% of global trade. China was finally brought into the WTO in December 2001 with a huge fanfare. President Bill Clinton sold the idea to Congress as being a one-way street in which huge Chinese market would suddenly open to American goods and services. In his words, we'll be able to export products without exporting jobs. Now this was at a time when the end of history paradigm of Francis Fukuyama was at its peak as well. This was the belief that liberal democracy would be the future of political systems across the world. President Clinton believed and said as much that bringing China into the WTO may not guarantee political reform, but accelerating this process of economic change will force China to confront that choice sooner rather than later. So the 1.3 billion Chinese would open up a huge market to the Western countries, especially American goods. And in time, it was expected to open up to political freedom, democracy, freedom of expression, and all those other good old-fashioned Western values. But to envisage that China could conceivably threaten the position of the world's only superpower was only expected by the very brave or those ready to be a laughingstock when they expressed these kind of views. In 2004, the Wall Street Journal asked 12 Nobel laureates in economics whether they thought the United States, the European Union, or China would boast the world's largest economy 75 years later in 2079. China had already been booming at that time for more than 2 decades, but only half of the economists named it as the winner. The others doubted that China could close the gap with the West. American policymakers now call President Bill Clinton naive for letting the dragon into their comfortable tent in which Western countries were flourishing up to then. But while WTO entry was the official recognition or the acknowledgement of Chinese entry into the global trading system, the reality was that since the 1980s, as Western countries deindustrialized and moved towards developing stronger service sector-orientated economies, Chinese cheaper labor had already attracted Western companies to go and set up there. and China had already become a vital location for global supply chains. Now, coming to what's driving US policy on China. Estimates vary, but given the current lower Chinese GDP growth, it is now expected to overtake the United States around 2035. But in purchasing power terms, the Chinese economy is already larger and passed the United States in 2014 as per the IMF. Finally, the penny dropped as it dawned on the United States that its role as the beacon of the free world, which is based on its economic prosperity and economic leadership, was starting to be chipped away by China. And in 2021, President Xi Jinping made his famous quote about the East is rising and the West is declining. US started scrambling around trying to understand how to delay its Suez moment. This is the historical event which really indicated the decline of the Great Britain at the time. In the United States, Trumpian America First politics kicked in, and in 2017 the Trump administration formally moved from engagement to designating China as a competitor.
In particular with China, we're going to be doing a Section 301 trade action. It could be about $60 billion, but that's really just a fraction of what we're talking about.
This is where history does a full circle. Now for the Western countries hit by China's dominance in exporting cheap and abundant goods due to free trade. President Xi gave a strong speech at the annual gathering of the world's capitalist leadership in 2017, the World Economic Forum at Davos, Switzerland, in his first visit there.
We must remain committed to developing free trade and investment, promote trade and investment, liberalization and facilitation through opening up, and say no to protectionism.
However, during the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump had been accusing China of the greatest theft in history and criticized the US trade deficit with China, which was about $346 billion, saying it was due to the unfair trade practices that China implemented. We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, his words. After coming into office, President Trump's America First economic nationalism rhetoric set in motion the United States moving towards a more inward-looking country. He imposed tariffs worth over $300 billion on China, saying that China is eating our lunch right now. Biden, who was expected to take back some of these initiatives, kept most and came in with even more. His most recent tariffs hit $13 billion of Chinese goods. But in response, former President Trump on his campaign trail has already said that he will impose a staggering 200% tariffs.
I said, I will put a 200% tax on every car that comes in from those plants, and they're not going to do that because they'll destroy our automobile business.
Now, listening to American politicians hyperbole on Chinese trade, or the China shock as it's sometimes categorized these days, you would be forgiven for thinking that trade with China has been the worst event in American life, when nothing could be further from the truth. Political hysteria is not likely to bring back jobs, which were mostly lost due to a secular change that was already occurring in the American and Western economies. Automation, robots, and a recession, changing industrial structure of the economy all played their part. Increasing tariffs will not save many jobs. These jobs were set to go, if not China, then Vietnam or Cambodia or even India. In fact, the negative hype on China's trade does not take into account that new jobs have also been created in the service sector due to these imports, whether it is in marketing, distribution, logistics, or in the Amazon, Walmart, and Targets in the country. Economists studying the Trump tariffs calculated that they cost as much as $900,000 per job per year for every worker protected. So they may say they're imposing tariffs to save American jobs, but evidence just doesn't support them. If we take this further into account, then research also shows that for each percentage increase in Chinese imports, the US consumer prices fell by nearly 2%. American consumers saved an estimated $411,000 for every US manufacturing job lost due to Chinese imports. And while that's not the only reason, but if you look back the past couple of decades, these have been the lowest inflationary periods for most Western countries, including the United States. Even more importantly, It was the low and the middle income households that benefited from these goods. Increase in tariffs will result in consumers paying higher prices for products, which will disproportionately hit the lower income households. So hitting out at China to save jobs makes no economic sense whatsoever. It's the craziest thing to do, which Biden apparently understood in 2019 when Trump was hitting at China with heavy tariffs. Biden tweeted, "Trump doesn't get the basics. He thinks his tariffs are being paid by China." Any freshman economic student could tell you that the American people are paying his tariffs. The cashiers at Target see what's going on. They know more about economics than Trump. So Biden seemed to get it when he was out of office, but adopted Trump's policies when he got into office. So why? Much of this economic chauvinism against China is being done for political reasons. And that's the second reason why they're doing it. Donald Trump's tariffs may have cost the American taxpayer more, but he benefited from that modest boost that he got from the voters. That has been estimated at around 0.7 percentage points during the 2020 election. In a closely contested election, every little bit helps, which is why maybe the strategy is being copied by President Biden in his latest announcement of tariffs against Chinese goods, given he is under huge electoral pressure, with each poll that comes out showing him losing to the former President Trump. In an election year, going tough on China sells. President Biden last month in one swing state, Pennsylvania, announced he would triple tariffs on Chinese steel. Pennsylvania is part of the Rust Belt, a region historically known for manufacturing and steel production. Similarly, his promise to increase tariffs on EV cars to 100% is an attempt to please the American auto industry, which historically is centered around Michigan, another key battleground state where Biden has recently faced a backlash, gaining the voters' attention who are showing their apathy to him in the midst of horrific scenes coming out of the Gaza war, as well as concerns over his age. Biden seems to be playing his last ball in key states by indulging in a trade war with China. Then we start getting deeper into the real reason why the United States has gone cold on China. The US security establishment believes, despite its protestations to the contrary, in what is called the Thucydides trap. In a book written by Graham Allison, he explains it as
Thucydides trap is a term I coined when a rising power, like Athens or China today, threatens to displace a ruling power, like Sparta or the US today. That creates a dangerous dynamic that frequently ends in war.
The concern, rightly so, is that China's economic might is translating into a military might. So national security fears exist over China's military modernization and technological advancement is occurring as China develops economically and threatens the United States' interests, especially in the South China Sea and Taiwan. A robust economy has enabled China to allocate substantial resources to its military, enhancing its defense capabilities. It now has the largest air force and navy in Asia. In fact, its navy physically is the largest in the world. So in anticipation of a potential war with China, the US needs to act preemptively. There is a fear of an over-reliance on China for critical materials and products such as rare earth elements, chips, even certain medical equipment and pharmaceuticals. During the COVID pandemic, these US supply chain vulnerabilities were exposed as there was a shortage of simple things like masks and crucial items like chips that went into everything from fridges to cars and phones. Imagine what would happen if the two countries went to war. The USA has also raised national security concerns about cybersecurity threats from China, particularly regarding Chinese tech companies like Huawei and TikTok, and fears that they are being used or could be used for espionage. The US has imposed restrictions and encouraged allies also to ban and limit the use of Chinese technology in critical infrastructure. Huawei was designated as a threat to national security in 2020, and US firms were banned from using government funds to buy its equipment. The UK, which had been in the midst of implementing Huawei equipment in its 5G structure, banned UK companies from doing so in 2020 on American persuasion, and similar pressure was placed on other American allied countries. Under the Biden administration, a number of export controls have been placed, tightening the availability of AI and high-end semiconductor chips, technology, manufacturing equipment, and limiting what can be sold to China. Investment in these areas inside China has also been banned by US companies. The administration has stressed it is only doing so in areas that may help the Chinese military. However, it is hobbling major US companies such as Intel, which manufactures inside China and exports billions of dollars worth of microchips to China. The Chinese market accounts for about 50% of all global semiconductor demand, and China accounts for around 28% of Intel's revenues. Billions of dollars are being approved through initiatives like the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and many others. The United States government is providing significant funding and incentives to increase American production capabilities in key sectors such as semiconductors and clean energy technologies to ensure it retains technological and industrial leadership in these areas. $53 billion alone in subsidies has been announced for the manufacture and the design and production of chips in the US under the CHIPS Act. They want to stop aggressive Chinese technology development, especially when it comes to semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and all the other nuts and bolts of the next industrial revolution, in which they cannot afford China to take leadership. Similarly, the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, has become a sore spot for the United States. It has become to be seen as the sign of China's aims to expand its economic and political influence globally at the cost of the US. This competition extends to areas like Africa and Southeast Asia. The US has even backed a plan to launch the India, Middle East, Israel, Europe corridor, which was launched in the G20 meeting last year. The US Foreign Policy Establishment, or as it is colloquially called, the Blob, sees itself in the role of, as President Biden put it, holding the world together. But its recent actions suggest that it no longer believes in free trade, open competition, or even a rules-based order. Thank you for giving me your time and reaching this far. I hope you will subscribe and like and share the video, and do suggest other topics that you're interested in being covered.